Ladies and gentlemen, imagine the hush of a late-night diner where exhaustion clings to every booth and hope feels as thin as a coffee refill. A single mother balances trays and prayers, trusting God to stretch what little she has when a well-dressed billionaire leaves behind a receipt stamped with a zero. No tip, no explanation, just silence. But faith has a way of whispering when the world shouts disappointment. As she clears the table, her hands trembling with questions she's asked heaven 1,000 times before, she notices something hidden beneath the plate, something placed there with purpose. In that fragile moment, grace interrupts scarcity, and what looks like rejection becomes revelation. This is a story about how God sees the unseen, how obedience meets provision, and how a single act, guided by faith, can rewrite a life that seemed forgotten, reminding us that miracles often arrive wrapped in humility and waiting to be discovered. Faith tested in moments of disappointment often arrives without warning, slipping into ordinary hours when strength is already thin. It shows up when expectations collapse quietly, not with drama but with a sigh, a pause, a question that lingers in the heart. For a single mother working long shifts, faith is not a lofty concept but a daily discipline, carried between tables and time cards, whispered between worries about rent and groceries. She believes because she must, because hope is sometimes the only thing that cannot be taken from her, even when circumstances seem determined to strip everything else away. When disappointment comes, it does not ask permission, and it does not soften its landing. It tests faith by challenging what was prayed for, what was expected, and what was trusted to arrive. In moments like these, disappointment speaks loudly. It points to the empty space where provision was supposed to be, to the effort that went unnoticed, to the sacrifice that yielded no visible reward. Faith, by contrast, often feels quiet, almost fragile, like a small flame threatened by every passing doubt. The test is not whether faith exists when blessings overflow, but whether it endures when the outcome feels unfair. A zero on a receipt can feel heavier than any spoken insult, because it confirms a fear many already carry that their work, their pain, and their perseverance are unseen. Faith is tested when the heart asks why obedience did not lead to immediate relief, why kindness was met with silence, why God seemed still when help was needed most. Yet faith under pressure reveals its true nature. It is not the absence of questions, but the decision to keep trusting while holding them. In disappointment, faith resists the urge to harden the heart or surrender to bitterness. It wrestles internally, caught between what is known of God's promises and what is visible in the present moment. The test lies in choosing to believe that God's silence is not neglect, and that His timing is not indifference. This kind of faith is forged in the unseen places, where no applause follows endurance and no immediate answers arrive to soothe the ache. Disappointment also tests faith by confronting identity. When someone gives their best and receives nothing in return, it tempts them to question their worth. Faith must then rise to remind the soul that value is not measured by tips, titles, or recognition, but by being seen and loved by God. This reminder does not always come easily. It must be repeated, sometimes through tears, sometimes through trembling prayers spoken under the breath. Faith becomes an act of resistance against despair, a refusal to believe that circumstances have the final word. There is a vulnerability in faith during disappointment that cannot be overlooked. It strips away the illusion of control and exposes how deeply one depends on God. In these moments, faith is no longer about confidence in outcomes but trust in character. It clings not to what God will do next, but to who He has always been. This kind of faith remembers past mercies when present ones are hard to find. It recalls every time provision arrived just in time. Every moment strength was given when none remained, even when the current situation feels painfully different. Disappointment tests faith by asking whether belief is conditional. Will trust remain if the blessing does not look the way it was imagined? Will worship continue if gratitude must be offered through clenched teeth? Faith answers these questions not with perfection, but with persistence. It may falter, it may bend, but it continues to stand, even if only barely. This perseverance is not weakness, it is quiet courage, the kind that chooses hope again and again despite evidence to the contrary. In such testing moments, faith also refines perspective. It shifts focus from what was lost to what might still be possible. Though disappointment narrows vision, faith widens it, inviting the heart to consider that God's work may be unfolding beyond immediate understanding. What appears to be an ending may be a pause, and what feels like rejection may be protection or redirection. Faith holds space for mystery, trusting that God can use even painful moments to prepare something greater than what was expected. The test of faith in disappointment is deeply personal, yet universally human. Everyone encounters moments when effort does not equal reward, when prayers seem unanswered, when trust feels costly. These are the crossroads where faith either deepens or dissolves. Choosing faith does not erase disappointment, but it transforms how it is carried. Instead of becoming a burden that crushes the spirit, disappointment becomes a weight that strengthens endurance. Faith tested in disappointment also cultivates compassion. Those who endure unseen struggles often develop a deeper sensitivity to others walking similar paths. Their faith, refined through hardship, becomes a source of quiet encouragement, not through grand speeches but through empathy and understanding. They know what it means to smile while breaking inside, to serve while struggling, to believe while waiting. Ultimately, faith tested in moments of disappointment becomes more authentic, less performative, more rooted. It is no longer dependent on favorable conditions or visible rewards. It is a faith that survives the night shift, the empty envelope, the unanswered prayer, and the long walk home filled with questions. It is a faith that continues to trust that God is still working, even when the evidence is hidden, even when the table looks empty, even when the heart aches with uncertainty and the soul quietly chooses to believe again despite everything suggesting otherwise. Hidden provision revealed through obedience often unfolds in ways that defy logic and resist expectation. It rarely announces itself with certainty or clarity, and it almost never appears when the heart demands proof. Instead, it waits quietly beneath the surface of ordinary actions, wrapped inside choices that seem small, routine, even insignificant. Obedience in these moments is not driven by understanding but by trust, a willingness to act faithfully without knowing what the outcome will be. It is the decision to keep doing what is right, not because it guarantees reward, but because it aligns with a deeper belief that God is present even when He is unseen. Obedience is most difficult when circumstances suggest it is pointless. When effort goes unnoticed, when kindness feels wasted, when integrity costs more than it gives, the temptation is to withhold obedience until conditions improve. Yet hidden provision often lies on the other side of persistence. It is concealed not because God is withholding, but because the timing and manner of His provision require faith to be exercised before sight is granted. Obedience becomes the language of trust, a declaration that God's promises are believed even when they are not yet visible. In the quiet acts of faithfulness, provision is often planted before it is revealed. What looks like a delay may actually be preparation, and what feels like emptiness may be space being made for something greater. Obedience positions the heart to receive what cannot be accessed through impatience or demand. It teaches the soul to listen, to remain attentive, to trust that God's hand is moving even when the eyes cannot trace its path. This kind of obedience is not passive resignation but active surrender, choosing to remain faithful rather than reactive. Hidden provision also challenges assumptions about how blessings arrive. Many expect provision to come in obvious forms, wrapped in certainty and comfort. Yet God often chooses subtlety, placing answers beneath layers of humility and waiting. Obedience sharpens spiritual awareness, enabling the heart to recognize provision when it does not match expectation. It trains the believer to look beyond appearances and to remain open to the possibility that God's generosity may be disguised as inconvenience, interruption, or even disappointment. There is a refining quality to obedience that precedes revelation. It strips away entitlement and replaces it with gratitude. When provision is uncovered through obedience, it carries deeper meaning because it was not forced or demanded. It becomes a testimony of faith rather than a transaction of effort. The heart learns that God is not obligated by human standards but is faithful according to His character. This realization transforms obedience from duty into devotion, from obligation into trust-filled action. Hidden provision revealed through obedience also reshapes timing. God's provision is rarely rushed, and obedience teaches patience in a world that demands immediacy. Each faithful step taken without assurance becomes an investment in trust. The waiting itself becomes part of the provision, strengthening resilience, deepening faith, and preparing the heart to steward what is eventually revealed. Obedience acknowledges that God's delays are not denials but deliberate moments designed to align purpose and readiness. Obedience often precedes understanding. The mind may resist, questioning why faithfulness should continue when evidence suggests otherwise. Yet obedience responds not to logic but to conviction. It rests on the belief that God sees beyond the present moment and works beyond human limitations. Hidden provision requires obedience precisely because it cannot be accessed through certainty. It demands movement before confirmation, trust before explanation, faith before reward. When provision is finally revealed, it often becomes clear that obedience was the key that unlocked it. What was hidden was never absent, it was simply waiting for alignment. This realization shifts perspective, revealing that God's provision was present all along, embedded within the journey itself. the strength gained, the character refined, the faith deepened through obedience become part of the blessing, inseparable from the tangible outcome. Hidden provision also affirms that God values faithfulness over visibility. Obedience performed in private, without recognition or affirmation, is not overlooked. God honors what is done in faith, even when no one else sees it. This truth brings comfort to those who labor quietly, trusting that their obedience is known and that provision will come in its appointed time. The revelation of hidden provision becomes a reminder that God's economy operates differently, valuing trust over transaction. Through obedience, the heart learns to expect God in unexpected places. It begins to look beneath the surface, to remain attentive, to believe that even ordinary moments can carry extraordinary purpose. Obedience cultivates a posture of readiness, a willingness to receive what God reveals without demanding control over how or when it arrives. This posture transforms waiting into worship and uncertainty into opportunity. Hidden provision revealed through obedience strengthens faith not just in what God gives, but in who He is. It confirms that God is intentional, attentive, and faithful to His promises. Each act of obedience becomes a thread woven into a larger story of trust and fulfillment. The revelation of provision does not erase the difficulty of obedience, but it illuminates its purpose, showing that faithfulness was never wasted, even when it felt costly. As obedience continues, it builds a pattern of trust that carries forward into future challenges. The memory of hidden provision revealed becomes a source of strength, reminding the heart that God has been faithful before and will be faithful again. Obedience becomes less about fear of lack and more about confidence in God's character. It transforms uncertainty into anticipation, teaching the believer to walk forward even when the path is unclear, trusting that provision is already placed, waiting to be uncovered at the appointed moment, resting beneath the surface of faithfulness and patience and trust in ways that only God can orchestrate. God's grace transforming ordinary lives is often most visible where life feels most unremarkable. Grace does not wait for perfection, wealth, or influence before it moves. It enters kitchens, classrooms, hospitals, and late-night diners, meeting people in routines that feel repetitive and small. Ordinary lives are the primary canvas on which grace paints its most powerful stories, because they reveal that transformation is not reserved for the extraordinary but offered freely to the faithful. Grace works quietly, steadily, reshaping hearts long before circumstances begin to change. In ordinary lives, grace often begins as